In times marked by spiritual confusion and incessant noise of opinions, the choice of a new pope is never neutral. The name he chooses carries in itself an intention, a direction, a symbol. When the world heard Leo XIV, it was not just a papal designation, but a statement. The name Lion evokes strength, vigilance, doctrinal firmness. It is a reference that plunges into tradition, connecting to the great Pope Leo Magno, who faced heresies and threats with courage and clarity of faith. Leo XIV did not arrive to represent an aesthetic change. His silent and determined presence indicates something deeper, a return to spiritual authority that is not measured by social acceptance, but by faithfulness to truth. In an ecclesial scenario marked by divisions and doubts, the name chosen by this pontiff is a living reminder that leadership in the Church must be, first and foremost, a prophetic act. The world asks who Leo XIV is. The Church wonders, what does it represent? Cardinal Robert Sarah became one of the most firm and clear voices of the contemporary Church. In his writings and speeches, he does not hide his concern about the identity crisis that crosses the Church, a crisis that is born of the desire to please the world to the cost of faithfulness to the gospel. The attempt to adapt to modern cultural standards, often in the name of inclusion or relevance, has led, according to Sarah, to the dilution of truth. He warns that a church that leaves its prophetic mission to follow the fashions of time loses its spiritual vigor and is no longer light in darkness. For Sarah, the problem is not dialogue with the world, but the temptation to be shaped by it. Faith cannot be negotiated, nor can the truth be rewritten for convenience. This criticism becomes especially relevant in the context of the new pontificate. If Leo XIV wishes to restore clarity and the strength of faith, it will need to face this crisis with courage and humility, as Sarah has always defended. The name Lion carries an inheritance that cannot be ignored. Leo XIV, known as Leo Magno, lived in a time of great turbulence. Internal doctrinal threats, external invasions, and challenges to the unity of the Church. With firm words and unshakable faith, he defended Catholic doctrine and reaffirmed Christ's centrality at a time when many were lost in theories and disputes. In choosing this name, Leo XIV symbolically puts himself in the same line of spiritual battle, not against visible enemies, but against the most subtle forces of the relativization of faith, moral confusion, and the loss of Christian identity. The parallel is not only historical, but deeply spiritual. Just as Leo Geno led God's people with firmness and compassion, Leo XIV seems to be restored, to restore the sense of the sacred in a church sometimes tempted to empty himself to become palatable. The name it carries is a living reminder that the papacy is not just an administrative craft, but a prophetic vocation, shaped to combat the truth. We live in an era where absolute truths are constantly questioned and replaced by opinions moldable to the taste of the moment. Within the Church itself, this relativistic mindset is no longer limited to the doctrinal peripheries. It threatens the core of faith, infiltrating homilies, documents, and even pastoral decisions. In this scenario, Pope Leo XIV is confronted with an urgent challenge, maintaining the foundation of Christian truth firm at a time when everything seems fluid and negotiable. Cardinal Sarah has always warned that giving in to relativism is losing the soul of the Church. A faith that agrees to be shaped by the world can no longer transform it. Therefore, the role of the new pope will not be that of an institutional manager, but that of a spiritual sentry. Its mission is to resist, not for pride or nostalgia, but for the sake of the truth that saves. Relativism offers temporary comfort, but empties eternity. The Church, through Leo XIV, is called again to say, "Here we are, firm in the truth of Christ." In Christian tradition, names are not chosen by chance. They carry destinations, print intentions, and often anticipate the battles to come. In assuming the name Leo XIV, the new pope not only honors his predecessors, but assumes a public vocation, that of being guardian of faith, firm pastor, defender of the truth. The lion, a symbol of courage and royalty, represents the one who protects his people with strength, but also with tenderness. It is a powerful image for a church that needs to relearn to unite doctrinal firmness with pastoral compassion. This is not authoritarianism, but spiritual authority. In times of confusion, the name Leo points to clarity. In times of fear, he points to courage, and in times of concessions, it points to conviction. The symbolic weight of this name requires coherence. It requires words to become actions, that gestures translate a clear position before the world. More than an aesthetic choice, Leo is a mission. And now everyone looks at Leo XIV, waiting for him to honor the so-called embedded call on his own name. In a culture marked by the volatility of opinions and the constant pressure to adapt, he stayed, firmly became almost an act of rebellion. But for the Christian faith, firmness is not obstinacy, it is fidelity. Cardinal Sarah speaks of this virtue as an urgent need, to resist not for pride, but for the sake of the truth. Spiritual firmness is the silent courage of not negotiating. Eternal principles in the name of convenience or public approval, and it is this kind of firmness that many expect to see incarnate in Leo XIV. It comes at a time when the Church needs not empty, but deep roots. Firmness is not rigidity. It is the clarity that sustains dialogue. It is integrity that strengthens compassion. When everything around seems to give in, the Pope who remains anchored actually becomes a lighthouse. Leo XIV, in carrying the name that evokes courage, is called to respond to modernity not with easy concessions, but with the firmness of those who know what is non-negotiable: Christ and his truth. For Cardinal Sarah, silence is more than the absence of words. It is the full presence of God. In his book, The Force of Silence, he describes this stillness as the space where the soul meets the truth, far from the frantic noise of the world. At a time when the Church often tries to compete with the media and the show, Sarah proposes a return to interiority, listening, contemplation. And it is precisely this spirituality that begins to echo in the first gestures of Leo XIV. A pope who does not hurry to respond, who avoids excess exposure, which prefers simple gestures to empty words. This posture, far from being weakness, is a sign of depth. The world requires speed and noise. Faith requires silence and presence. True spiritual authority does not come from volume, but from intimacy with God. Leo XIV, following this path of inner collection and firmness, not only honors Sarah's thought, but offers the world a leadership anchored in what is not past, the mystery of God. In many times of church history, the popes were called to face visible battles, wars, schisms, external heresies. Today, combat is more subtle, but equally devastating. It is a spiritual battle, where the enemy is the doctrinal confusion, the trivialization of faith, and the temptation to please the world at the expense of truth. Leo XIV appears as a non-triumphalist rhetoric pontiff, but of spiritual resistance. As a silent warrior, he did not wield swords, but the cross, prayer, faithfulness. Sarah describes this kind of struggle as the hardest, one that requires inner courage, perseverance in the face of contempt, and faith in the face of indifference. A warrior pope is not the one who imposes by strength, but who firmly protects the truth entrusted to him. In times when many seek leaders who say what they want to hear, Leo XIV represents the pastor who says what is needed, even if it costs, because the true battle of the church is spiritual, and it depends on the fate of souls. In a world dominated by metrics, likes, and instant approvals, the temptation to shape the truth to the expectation of the public is constant, even within the church. But Cardinal Sarah has always been clear: a spiritual leader is not in the world to please, but to be faithful. This loyalty can be expensive: criticism, rejection, isolation, but it is the only possible way for a pastor who wants to lead his flock to salvation, not just comfort. Leo XIV seems to have understood this requirement from the first moments of his pontificate. His choice for a more austere, contemplative, and essential stance indicates that he does not seek applause, but consistency. The true pope is not the most charismatic in the eyes of the world, but the most committed to God's eyes. The popularity is volatile, faithfulness eternal. And in the face of an ambiguity, wounded church, God's people call on marketing strategies, but by leaders who knelt before speaking and speak only after listening to heaven. Renewing does not mean destroying. This is one of the central ideas in Cardinal Sarah's spirituality and theology. In his view, the true renewal of the church can only happen when it springs from its roots, of the living tradition that crosses the centuries. It is a mistake to believe that to dialogue with the modern world, the church should abandon its identity or relativize its teachings. On the contrary, it is in the depth of its inheritance that the church finds the strength to renew with authenticity. Leo XIV, by adopting a reverent stance regarding the liturgy, doctrine, and contemplative silence, seems to understand that tradition is not dead weight, but fertile soil. A pope who walks with the past, not to be attached to him, but to project faith solved for the future. Without tradition, all innovation is blind. Without roots, no tree remains standing. Leo XIV is invited to show the world that fidelity to origins is not resistance to the new. It is the only legitimate way to make it flourish. Leo XIV takes the papacy at a point of tension. On the one hand, a part of the church calls for rapid changes that align with the winds of the modern world. On the other, many faithful cry out for a reaffirmation of eternal truths, fearing that the desire for adaptation becomes synonymous with abandonment of faith. The new pope finds himself in the face of a historical challenge: how to be faithful to the demands of time without betraying the roots of the church. This tension between tradition and renewal is not new, but now it presents itself with more intensity and urgency. Cardinal Sarah insists that the church should not choose between them, but learn to renew itself without breaking. Balance is delicate, but possible and necessary. Leo XIV may be the bridge between these two worlds, showing that fidelity does not exclude creativity, and that reform need not mean rupture. Its mission is clear: to lead Peter's boat without leaving it to drift in the seas of convenience. And that requires more than skill, requires holiness. In recent times, the word unity has been used as a justification for dangerous concessions. Many propose a communion that accepts everything, tolerates everything, relativizes everything, in the name of peace and harmony. But Cardinal Sarah teaches that there is no true unity without truth. The communion of the church is not built on fragile agreements, but about the faithfulness to Christ and the doctrine he has entrusted to us. Leo XIV, reaffirming traditional values and recovering forgotten symbols, does not do so to divide, but to purify. Its clear posture is not exclusion, it is responsibility. The church needs a unity that unites, not that dilutes. That invites conversion, not conformism. If Leo XIV remains faithful to this view, it will be criticized, By some, misunderstood by others, but will also be to many a sign of hope. True unity does not eliminate differences, but reconcile them in the light of truth. And where the truth is wounded, unity becomes only appearance. It's time to heal, not make up. In times of excessive words, images, and noise, the church is in danger of becoming another actor in the theater of the world, opting for everything, reacting to everything, trying to be relevant at any cost. But the heart of the church is not in the headlines, but on the altar. It is in the consecrated hands that celebrate in small chapels, in the nuns that pray away from the eyes of the world, in the faithful anonymous who support everything with their hidden prayer. This is the royal church, to which Cardinal Sarah calls silent church, and it is to her that Leo XIV seems to want to return the protagonism. By avoiding the spotlight and choosing a more sober and collected style, the Pope sends a powerful message. It is not the saving spectacle, but holiness. True renewal begins in silence, listening, faithfulness. It is this hidden church that has kept faith alive in the moments of the earliest centuries. The saints have made it clear that faithfulness to God often requires displeasing men. At a time when pressure on cultural acceptance is immense, a pope who puts God's will above social expectations becomes a sign of contradiction, but also of hope. Cardinal Sarah never tires of repeating, the mission of the spiritual leader is not being popular, it is being obedient, obedient to the word, tradition, the truth that liberates. Leo XIV has given signs that this call is well understood. His simple gestures, his direct language, his reverence for the liturgy and his reserve in the face of the applause of the world indicate a different way. Not of free rebellion, but from loyalty to high. This obedience, in times of moral and doctrinal confusion, is a precious testimony. When a pope listens to God more than political pressures, he reminds the church and the world that salvation does not come from human consensus, but from radical faithfulness to the gospel. Renewing is not screaming louder, nor giving in to the fashions of time. The true renewal begins when the soul meets its center, when the noise gives way to listening, when activism submits to prayer. Cardinal Sarah insists that the drama of the present church is not the lack of action, but the absence of inner silence. Leo XIV seems to understand this reality in depth. His pontificate began not with media euphoria, but with recollection and firmness. His first steps indicate that he wants a reform that is not born of strategic meetings, but from personal and community conversion. A church that folds to your knees before taking to the streets, that listens to God before speaking to the world. And perhaps it is precisely this choice for the essential that will make this Pope a milestone. Because in a saturated world of words, the church that silences before God is the only one that still has something true to say. It is from this silence, fertile and deep, that it will spring up all true renewal. If this message touched your heart, if you feel that the church needs more silence, more true, more spiritual courage, so write Amen here in the comments. Not as any word, but as an act of faith, as a silent yes to God's will. Let's fill this space with prayers, with hope, with voices that still believe, because when the world makes noise, faith responds with silence and with Amen.